Hello everyone and welcome to my tech talk about troubleshooting endpoint privilege management and what steps you can take if you are facing issues with the EPM agent or the policy. There are some basic steps we can take to find out about the root cause of an issue or unexpected behavior. So first thing we can do is check if we see any events on the endpoint that are related to EPM. For this, we can observe the application section in the Windows event log and look out for successful service events, errors related to licensing, and if the policy has been loaded successfully. We should also check if the EPM agent is already installed and running. For this, we can have a look if the EPM service and eventually any management adapters are working correctly. Also, we can check if we can find any misconfiguration in the EPM registry hives. Please note that EPM is listed under the legacy name Avector Privilege Guard Client. In the next step, we need to make sure that the correct policy has been downloaded and applied to the client. The policy cache that we can find in program data, Avector Privilege Guard, can help us to identify the right policy by the appropriate folder and the correct timestamp. We can also review the config files manually, as we need to consider that more than one policy may have been applied to the client. For more information about policy order and policy precedents, please also check out the EPM documentation on beyondtrust.com/docs. For troubleshooting the EPM policy, the first place we should look for is again the application log in the event viewer. Here we can find all relevant information for any EPM event that gives us enough details, including the work style and its description, the application group, the path of an eventual parent process, the owner of the file or process, the name of the token that has been used to run the process or application, the message name, and much more. Finally, we can use the Activity Viewer tool that helps us to visualize the policy processing logic and how it matches within EPM. For a more advanced troubleshooting step, we can run the service hook driver test that helps us to identify which part of the EPM agent can be the root cause for an issue or an unexpected behavior. This test involves all relevant components of the EPM agent that are responsible for managing a process, task, or application. The test should be executed in different steps, and the results should be noted after each of them has been finished. For this, we can stop the EPM service and check if the issue still remains. We can rename the EPM hook DLL and see if the issue is still there after a reboot. We can stop the EPM driver and again check for the issue. And finally, we can remove the EPM agent completely from the endpoint and check if we can still reproduce the issue after all. Beside this manual troubleshooting procedure, the EPM installation also comes with two troubleshooting tools that can be found in the EPM directory in program files. PG Capture Config collects important information and creates a support package that can be sent to our support for further investigation. Trace Config is used to obtain diagnostic data around the activity of the components of the agent and should only be used while the issue is reproduced. I am now going to show you how you can run the troubleshooting steps on an EPM endpoint and where to find the relevant information. So the first thing we want to make sure is if the EPM agent is installed here on the endpoint. And for this, the most obvious thing to check for is the EPM systray icon. So just have a look at the systray, and you can see here in my systray that I have the EPM icon available. It's the orange icon. And just do a mouse over, and it should show you Beyond Trust Privilege Management. The EPM icon doesn't have any function for the end user, so it shows notification for an application launch, for example, but there's nothing for the user to do in here. So you can do a left click and a right click, but you can't see any function. So it just gives us a good indication that the agent is installed in some way. So the next thing we want to make sure is if we can see any EPM events in the Windows event log. So for this, we just open the Windows event viewer and open the application section and look out for any events related to the Avector Defend Point service, which is the legacy name of the product. which is called today Beyond Trust Endpoint Privilege Management, or Beyond Trust EPM. We can also create a custom view like I did in here, Beyond Trust EPM, so that we only see the EPM events. So first of all, we want to make sure that the service is running. Event ID 0 is telling us in here that the service has started already, which is good. The next step, we maybe want to check if the configuration has been applied here on the endpoint. So always look for event ID 200 to see this kind of information. So in here we see that the configuration has been loaded successfully. So I do actually have a configuration here on this agent. And if we watch this in more detail, we can see that it is a Beyond Insight configuration. So it comes from a Beyond Insight management, or from a Beyond Insight server. The next step, and this is actually one of the most common issues, check for the policy, if the policy has been applied to the configuration and has been applied here to the agent. And you can see here that we have an error for event ID 10, and it's telling us that the configuration doesn't have any valid license. It has either expired or hasn't been assigned to the policy at all. If you want to check for the service itself, you can do this by simply opening the services MSC and make sure that the Vector Defend Point service is up and running, like in here. Also, we want to make sure that the corresponding adapters are working fine as well. So in my case, my EPM agent is managed by Beyond Insight. So I want to make sure that the adapter for Beyond Insight is running correctly as well. So if your agent is maybe managed by EPM SaaS, by PMC, or by IC3, you need to check out for the privilege management console adapter as well. You can see it here. It is installed on my machine, but it is not activated, so it's not running, as again, my agent is managed by Beyond Insight. So now let's have a look at the registry and see if we can find any misconfiguration in the EPM settings. We can open the registry as a standard user, so we don't need to elevate registry or services if we just want to check for the settings or for the options. And one of the first things we want to make sure is that the policy order is set correctly. So in my case in here, I want to have the Beyond Insight option in the first place. If we are going to manage the EPM with GPO, for example, then we want to have GPO set as the first option in the policy order. With EPM SaaS, it would be web service, which needs to be here in the first order. Some other options we can check in here is the Beyond Insight URL and the Beyond Insight workgroup, also the Beyond Insight cert name. Make sure that this is specified correctly and that you have the right URL for your Beyond Insight server or your Beyond Insight UVM. Once we have checked the basic settings and we have made sure that the EPM agent is installed and a policy is applied, we can now have a look which policy has actually been downloaded and applied to our endpoint. The policies for EPM are cached in the program data folder. However, if an EPM policy is active on the endpoint, you will not be able to access this folder as the built-in anti-tamper protection is preventing any elevated process from reading or writing to the local policy cache. There are different ways to access this folder to read the cached EPM policy. We can log in as a real administrator, as the policy is typically only assigned to standard users. Alternatively, we can just temporarily disable the EPM agent, which also requires a real admin account. Another option would be to deactivate the anti-tamper protection in the policy itself. However, this is typically not recommended under normal circumstances. For now, let's just disable the EPM service and start the services MSC with a real admin account. Once we have stopped the EPM service, we can now access the policy cache folder in program data. Just going back and select the Avecto folder, continue here. We get prompted by USC, so we can just provide the same credentials as before. And now we have access to the Avecto section in program data and can start to review the policies. The applied policy can be found in the privilege guard folder. So let's have a look which policies are actually here on my client. As you can see, I have different policy types assigned to this endpoint. This can be the case when we have multiple ways to manage the policy for the EPM agent, or when we are in a migration scenario where we are migrating the client from one policy management to the other, for example, moving from GPO management to Beyond Insight management. Like in here, we have GPO, EPO, Beyond Insight policy, and of course, local policy. Having a look at the timestamp, we can assume that the Beyond Insight policy is the most recent one and is actually active on my client here. The policy itself is provided as an XML file, so you can open it by just clicking on it, and it will open with Internet Explorer in my case. And now you can check for the correct version, the policy ID, or you can also search for settings that are unique to your policy and make sure that it's the policy that you wanted to be applied to the endpoint. If the policy is downloaded and applied to the client correctly, it still can have wrong settings in the work styles, application routes, or application definition, or other relevant parts of the configuration. We can again use the event viewer that gives us a lot of useful information for applications or processes that are managed and controlled by the EPM agent. Like in here, we see that this application has been launched with an admin token. We can also see the command line of the process. We see the process ID and the parent process ID. We can look for the name of the work style and application group. We can also have a look at the message name that has been used to prompt the user. And we see the file owner, like in here, it's administrator. All of this information can help us to find out why the policy is not working as expected and where we need to make changes for correction. Another option to troubleshoot the EPM policy is by using the Activity Viewer tool. The Activity Viewer is an advanced diagnostics tool that can help us to identify misconfiguration in the work styles. It allows to remotely connect to any EPM client on the network and to view all recent activity on the desktop. You can install the Activity Viewer as a separate installation, or you can just simply run it from the Tools section of the Policy Editor. Once the Activity Viewer is started, we can create a new snapshot to capture all EPM activity. You can also connect to a remote agent on the network and provide relevant credentials. And even now, we can already see a lot of information about the process, the policy, the work style, the application group, the user and the timestamp, and the token that has been used in here. So let's say we want to understand if my anti-light application here from my desktop is matching the correct EPM setting. So I'm just going to launch anti-light, accepting the user message. And once it has been launched, I'm going back to my activity viewer and just click on refresh. And now I should see my anti-light process at the top of the list. I can now double click on it and it will give me much more detailed information of what has been matched against the policy. I can see now the work style. I can see the filters that has been used, the application group. Like in my case in here, it's the NEUAC executable application group. And further down, I can see more relevant information like if the application required elevation, the trusted owner, the publisher, and also the file name. We are now coming to the last section of our troubleshooting video, where we see how to run the so-called service hook driver test and how to use the PG capture config and the trace config tool. The service hook driver test is a generic test that can help in checking which part of the EPM agent may or may not be involved in an issue, depending on the outcome. There's also a very detailed guide in our knowledge base on how to run the test. EPM has three main components that can be relevant when it comes to any issues or unexpected behavior. The EPM service, which we have already seen earlier in the video, the EPM hook DLL, which is called PG hook DLL, and the EPM driver, which is the PG driver sys. We will now show how to eliminate each of these components as a root cause of an issue. To exclude the EPM service as a potential root cause, we again need to stop and disable the service using a real administrator that is not controlled or elevated by EPM. So we are doing this by starting services MSC with this real admin user. So we're looking for the avec the defend point service. And for this test, we're not just only stopping the service, we're also going to disable it. So once the service is stopped, you can now try to reproduce the issue. If the problem still persists, retest by using the Run as Administrator context option and provide credentials for real administrator. If you can still reproduce the issue, reboot the machine and also reboot the steps. If the issue is solved by disabling the service, it is very likely that the problem is related to the EPM policy or associated settings. In case the issue still persists, we can go to the next step and test the hook DLL. To disable the hook DLL, we again need to stop and disable the EPM service, like we did already. We can then go ahead and rename the PG hook DLL in the program files and program files x86 directory of EPM. Just go in here, look out for the PG hook DLL and rename it to, for example, PG hook DLL temp. You will be prompted for admin credentials and do the same in the x86 directory. So once we have done this, we can try to reproduce the issue as the affected user. If it's still persisting, we can also try again to reboot and retest. If the issue is resolved with disabling the hook DLL, it could be addressed with a so-called hook exclusion setting. In this case, I would suggest to get in touch with our support team if you haven't already done this at this stage. If you are still facing the issue, go to the next step and check the kernel driver. So to disable the kernel driver, we need to open a command prompt or PowerShell using a local administrator that is not controlled or elevated by EPM. We then need to type the following two commands to stop and disable the driver. So that would be sc stop pg driver, which is the name of the kernel driver. And we are getting the response that the driver is stopped now. And it's followed by sc config pg driver start equals disabled. So the driver would be stopped and disabled now. And as with the steps before, we can now go ahead and try reproducing the issue before and after a reboot if needed. If the issue disappears with disabling the kernel driver, it's best to reach out to our support to assist with further analysis. However, if the issue can still be reproduced, it is very unlikely that EPM is involved here. If you reach this point, uninstall the EPM agent perform a final reboot and retest the issue for our verification. So in the last part of our video, I would like to show you two troubleshooting tools that can be very helpful when you're already in contact with our support team. So that's the PG Capture Config tool and the Trace Config tool. So both can be found in the installation directory of EPM. So just navigate to C program files, rvector, privilege guard client, and you can find them in here. It's PG Capture Config and Trace Config executable. As both tools require access to privileged areas of the agent and the endpoint, they both need to be launched using a real admin account that is not controlled by the EPM agent or or protected by anti-tamper. However, if your policy is based on the Quick Start policy template, it will run both of the applications with a customized access token that has anti-tamper protection turned off. So in that case, you don't need any other credentials. So let's start with the trace config tool. If you launch the application with an EPM standard user, like I did in here, you might get a similar screen like this, where you can do a change response procedure or simply provide credentials of a designated user that is assigned to this message field. So in my case, it's again the ADM user. You may have assigned this permission in EPM to a service desk group or any other equivalent group of users that is allowed to run this application elevated or to put the credentials in here. So the trace config tool will help us to collect any relevant information from the EPM components while we are reproducing an issue or any other unexpected behavior. To do so, tick all the available options related to your installation. So I've just ticked here pretty much everything except from EPO, as I know for sure that I don't have an EPM installation. If you are not sure what information is required from you at this point, just select everything. Make sure that the verbose option is ticked for the three main components for the service, the hook, and the kernel driver. Select the output directory and then just click on Start. Now, while the trace is running, we can try to reproduce our issue or the behavior that is kind of unexpected here. I'm just going to run my anti-light application with an on-demand elevation, just to get some data into the logs. I'm accepting the message with a reason. So the application is launched. Just closing this message, closing the application. And when we are finished with reproducing the issue, we can just click here on Stop and go to the output directory and send the client debug ETL file to the support team of Beyond Trust. Now let's do the same with the PG Capture Config tool. Going back to my installation directory and looking for the PG Capture Config executable in here. Again, I'm going to run this with a standard user and let EPM elevate the application without anti-tamper enabled by providing a designated user here in the over-the-shoulder authentication. And now it's opening the PG Capture Config tool for me. I'm going to enable all the options that I have here. Again, you can select what is relevant for you, but if you're not sure, just click on all. If you have a reference number already assigned from the support, you can type in an incidence, the incidence number or the ticket number in here. If you don't have any reference at this point, just type in your company name. Select the outputs directory. And then click on Next and wait for the capture to complete. This can take a while as the tool is not only collecting EPM data, but also information from services like MS Info or Windows Error Reporting. So once it's finished, it will zip all collected data and it will store it in the log file that we have selected before. Just click on Finish. And now you can just simply send the zip file to the Beyond Trust support. Now let's finish this session with a quick summary of what we have learned from the presentation and the demo today. The Windows event log is a very useful source of information, and even missing events or the lack of events can give us some good indication about the presence of the agent or its policy. For basic checks like the services and the registry, we don't need any privileges or elevation at all. This can be done by any standard user. However, to check the policy cache, we need a real admin account as the EPM agent has built-in protection to avoid manipulation of this critical area. Also, the client installation comes with some tools that can help us with the troubleshooting procedure, like the activity viewer. And if we are facing more serious issues, we have a procedure like the service hook driver test to identify and locate the root cause. And finally, we can escalate to Beyond Trust support, who can help with advanced troubleshooting based on the information from our collecting tools. So thank you for your time today, and that's it from me and my tech talk about troubleshooting endpoint privilege management.